The Will Eisner Comic Industry Awards, better known as the Eisners, is regarded as one of the highest honors one can achieve in comic books. The categories are extensive, covering all the aspects of comic book production, such as writing, pencils, inking, lettering, and so on. Beginning in 1991, the award ceremony became part of Comic-Con, the annual comic book convention held in San Diego. The awards are sponsored by various industry companies and voted on by comic book professionals. But first, let's look at how the award began. Of course, the award's namesake is Will Eisner, a creator who is regularly mentioned in the same breath as Jack Kirby. He is best known for The Spirit, a weekly comic book insert that ran for 12 years in the Sunday edition of various syndicated newspapers. Eisner is also known for popularizing the term graphic novel. He specifically meant original comic works that were complete, like an actual novel, but the term has been widely adopted to mean any collection of comic book work. Originally, between 1985 and 1987, the Eisners began as the Jack Kirby Comics Industry Awards. The Kirby Awards were, allegedly, a response to the awards handed out by the Comic Buyer's Guide, which were voted on by anyone who obtained and sent in a ballot. It was, in essence, the People's Choice Awards for comic books. The idea for the Kirby Awards originated with either Gary Groth or Kim Thompson, the two main figures behind Fantagraphics and the Comics Journal. According to Dave Olbrich, who worked at Fantagraphics and subsequently organized the Kirby Awards, the intent was to have the best comics chosen by industry professionals, not the average person. The Kirby Awards only lasted for a brief time. The main factor was Olbrich left Fantagraphics and then became involved with Malibu Comics. Olbrich attempted to continue the Kirby Awards, but Fantagraphics held the rights to it, and this led to a dispute between Olbrich and Fantagraphics. At some point during this fight, Jack Kirby withdrew his name from the award, so neither party could continue. This led to the Harvey Awards, which were presented by the Comics Journal, and the Eisners, which would become a part of San Diego Comic-Con in 1991. Olbrich oversaw the ceremony for the first few years, and he was instrumental in getting Will Eisner to lend his name to the award. However, in 1990, there was no awards or award ceremony. This was due to numerous errors on the nomination ballot. Olbrich publicly admitted blame for these mistakes and stepped down as the event organizer. Jackie Estrada, who was suggested by Eisner, took Olbrich's position, and she's been the administrator ever since. As for his involvement, Will Eisner was present at every ceremony and personally handed out awards to recipients until he passed away in 2005. Otherwise, his involvement with the awards was best summed up by a statement he made when the Eisners were cancelled in 1990. Quote, "I simply allowed Mr. Olbrich and his sponsors to use my name as the title of the awards under the condition that it have an impartial board of governors under a non-profit corporation. Operating or administrating involvement was never my intention nor contemplated by anyone." Unquote. The system for nominees and voting has changed slightly through the years, but for some time, the process has worked like this. Up to 5 nominees for each category are submitted by the publishers. Those submissions are then assembled by a panel of judges, who change from year to year. The judges compile a short list of nominees that are then voted on by industry professionals. The winner is determined by popular vote, so it's a very democratic process, leading to the winners receiving recognition from their peers. This video will strictly focus on the topic of Best New Series. The very short list of nominees for 1988 were The American, Concrete, and Eddy Current. The award went to Concrete by Paul Chadwick. Concrete is about Ron Lithgow, a former speechwriter trapped in an alien body. He's nearly invulnerable, quite strong, and his eyes are able to see great distances and to a microscopic depth. He can hold his breath for an hour and seems impervious to extreme weather conditions and fatigue. His internal temperature is so high, it actually boils water. He can eat anything, even rocks and wood. When he eats rocks, those somehow transmute and become part of his outer shell. The negative effect of this transformation is having no sense of taste or smell, and his sense of touch seems greatly diminished. Finally, he lives in a world not designed for a 7-foot-tall, massive solid stone. Concrete is a grounded examination of what it would be like to find yourself locked inside an indestructible stone shell, completely divorced from everything that defined you as a human being. Your actual experience of life has become, quite literally, alien to your own mind. The series has gone on to be a classic example of great writing and artwork, which I've already covered in a prior video, so I would recommend watching that for an in-depth overview of the series. In short, it was a very good choice for the award. The nominees expanded in 1989, and they were Animal Man, Excalibur, Kings in Disguise, May's Agency, and V for Vendetta, which is quite the impressive list. The winner was Kings in Disguise by James Vance and Dan Burr. Kings in Disguise is about Freddie Block, a young man who becomes a drifter during the 1930s. Originally, it began as a stage play that the writer adapted and expanded into a 6-issue series. It's the backstory of the protagonist and what led him to become a communist. It's a subtle layered story with many defining moments, and one does get a very good sense of the social turmoil happening during the Depression. It does contain a character with predatory behavior that may come off as homophobic to some, mainly because he's not overly developed. That said, the character in question isn't a flat stereotype, and he is representative of an aspect of drifter culture. To be honest, this was a comic I'd never seen or heard about, and I had to track it down for this video, mainly because I wanted to see what was considered better than Animal Man and V for Vendetta, both of which have become classics to a certain degree. Kings in Disguise does hold its own against both comics. Again, it's very different and might not appeal to many, but it is a very solid story with a diverse cast of characters in a time when social upheaval and finding anything to believe in was a difficult task. The awards were cancelled entirely for 1990, and for some reason, when they did return, there was no Best New Series award between 1991 and 1994. However, the award resumes in 1995. The nominees in 1995 were Bizarre Heroes, Rarebit Fiends, Tyrant, THB, and Too Much Coffee Man. The winner that year was Too Much Coffee Man by Shannon Wheeler. Out of a list of oddball titles, Too Much Coffee Man was the oddest of them all. This is an absurd underground-style comic that just works. Certainly, it's a parody of superheroes, but it's not strictly a parody like The Tick, nor is it delightfully bizarre like The Flaming Carrot. It's also not just about the lead character. In some ways, it's like a very accessible version of Weirdo or Neat Stuff, mainly starring a guy whose skull is shaped like a large coffee cup. This is definitely a series worth a closer examination, as its history spans across comics, mini-comics, magazines, webcomics, and an opera, which can be seen on YouTube. Wheeler also did a successful Kickstarter to reprint the comic, and a digital version can be purchased on his Etsy store. Personally, I've only stumbled across the odd issue here and there, so it's surprisingly hard to find for an Eisner Award-winning comic. Still, it's worth the effort. The nominees for 1996 were Black Hole, The Book of Ballads and Sagas, Astro City, Optic Nerve, Preacher, and Stray Bullets. Once again, a good list that covers a wide variety of genres. The winner was Astro City by Kurt Busiek and Brent Anderson. Astro City contains the wild, inventive characters of the 1960s and puts them in a grounded 1990s type of setting. That is, they're taken seriously, but not to the point where they're grim and gritty, which is what makes this a distinctive series with its own unique voice. There is an amazing amount of mythology that emerges through mostly intimate, short stories. However, it's a slow-burning, character-oriented series, especially in the early volumes. It's perfect for anyone who misses the imagination of the 60s, but prefers a story with more modern sensibilities. There's a fair amount of mythology and world-building in Astro City, and you'll find a number of disguised homages to popular, mainstream characters. It's a series where you'll wonder why those that complain about stagnant superhero fiction don't read the series and shut up. The nominees for 1997 were Barry Windsor Smith, Storyteller, Coventry, Leave It to Chance, Nowhere, and The Wretch. The winner was Leave It to Chance by James Robinson and Paul Smith. Leave It to Chance was about Chase Faulkner, a young woman who's next in line to become the protector of the city, Devil's Echo. However, her father, the current protector, believes the role isn't intended for a woman, so he doesn't approve of her intent to follow in his footsteps. Chance sets out to prove him wrong and begins investigating supernatural occurrences around the city. It's a story that could easily appeal to a young adult audience, with the theme of assuming one's destiny despite the challenges to prevent them from becoming what they are. Much like Robinson's Starman, the city is also a main character. He builds Devil's Echo into a believable urban fantasy setting that has a history and many different facets. Unfortunately, despite the creative team's intent to do the series for as long as possible, it would only last 13 issues in total, with the final issue being a jumping-on point and a soft conclusion. It was published through Homage, an imprint of Wildstorm, and it was put on hiatus due to low sales, just as Jim Lee was negotiating Wildstorm's sale to DC. This lack of support disenchanted Robinson, and despite the good reviews, he couldn't find the time or energy to relaunch it. It's a title that should have caught on. Instead, it faded away. The nominees for 1998 were Castle Waiting, Lost Stories, Soulwind, Squee, and A Touch of Silver. Again, another diverse selection, with the winner being Castle Waiting by Linda Medley. Castle Waiting is a story that's deeply rooted in fairy tales, with a slight modern touch applied to them. There are references galore, many of which likely went over my head. The origin story is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, and the main story focuses on Lady Jane, a pregnant woman who has recently escaped an abusive relationship. So in classic fairy tale fashion, the main story begins in a very dark place. For the most part, it's Lady Jane's journey and her discovery of the location, Castle Waiting. This self-published series has a rather unique voice and numerous interesting characters with relatable ideals. It is similar to Fables, in the sense that a modern lens is applied to an anachronistic, strictly medieval setting. And, while there are many adventures that are somewhat disguised as morality plays, it doesn't preach or condescend. It's very well managed and evenly paced, with stories that are pretty easy to follow despite the number of characters. Castle Waiting has a complex start and stop publishing history, and it's an example of how a good series fell through the cracks due to the chaotic market of the late 90s. It was eventually completed in 2012 and published by Fantagraphics. For those interested, there is a definitive edition available, which I would suggest because the series has been revised during its various iterations. Ironically, like most fairy tales, the reality of Castle Waiting is like a cautionary tale. It highlights how a work of passion, done very well and with great buzz, can experience a lack of support and feel like a burden to the creator. But there's still that need to finish what was started, which is a testament to Medley's character. The nominees for 1999 were Age of Bronze, Colonia, Inhumans, Lenore, and Young Justice, with the winner being Inhumans by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee. Inhumans is about their culture and their disconnected place in the world. Unlike most Inhuman stories, it doesn't focus strictly on the royal family. However, the premise of a human nation attacking and breaching the Inhuman complex is long and drawn out. Half of the 12-issue series is dedicated to this conflict, with the king, Black Bolt, standing around and not responding. There is a grand scheme, but by the time it gets there, you're simply glad it's finally over. As a story about a superhero kingdom, it's fine, and Jay Lee's art is never hard to look at, but as an award-winning story, it doesn't really satisfy. It's one of the more perplexing choices by the voters. With the benefit of hindsight, and knowing the nominees and winners to come, this seems like the point where good, independent works are highlighted less than more popular, mainstream titles. Now, this can't be entirely blamed on Comic-Con becoming more commercialized, although that is a factor later on. It's more a sign that the comic book landscape is difficult terrain. For the industry, this is a pretty bleak time. Sales would hit an all-time low within a few years, so the market isn't completely bottomed out yet, but it's nearly there. It's a tough time for the big two, and even worse for small press titles. So the viability and visibility of independence is almost non-existent. This may be one more reason why more commercial work gets the Eisner spotlight in the future. As a comparison, let's look at the Harvey Award winners for the same years. The Harveys are voted by industry professionals, so one might expect the results to be somewhat similar. In fact, Concrete and Kings in Disguise were the Harvey and Eisner Award winners for 1988 and 1989, respectively. The Best New Series category was suspended by the Eisners for a few years, but during that time, the Harvey winners were 8-Ball by Daniel Close in 1990, Hate by Peter Begg in 1991, and Cages by Dave McKean in 1992. In 1993, it was Madman by Mike Aldred, and in 1994, it was Captain Stern by Bernie Wrightson. The Eisner for the Best New Series returned in 1995. The winners were Too Much Coffee Man and Acme Novelty Library by Chris Ware. In 1996, Astro City won both the Eisner and the Harvey, as did Leave It to Chance in 1997. In 1998, Castle Waiting was the Eisner winner, and the Harvey went to Penny Sentry by Jaime Hernandez. Finally, in 1999, the Eisner went to Inhumans, and the Harvey went to The Spirit, New Adventures by various writers and artists. For the first decade these awards existed, there was a lot of overlap. With the benefit of foresight, this will rarely happen in the future, but for a time, they had similar results. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, give this video a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. If you can support the channel, please do. I cannot emphasize that enough. With that said, thanks to all my fine supporters on YouTube and Patreon. Your contributions are very appreciated. Thank you so very, very much. You make it possible for this channel to limp along in its current state. Extra special thanks to Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sicken, Francis De La Cruz, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrews, Corey Drew, L.S. Gregor, Alexa Zernish, Brian Deaton, and Matt Marino. You are all justified and ancient.